Trump's 500% tariff bomb. Will India's exports to the US come to a complete standstill? Imagine this. One morning you open the news and a single line hits your eyes like a hammer. 500% tariff. Not 5%, not 50%, a full 500%. A number that isn't just a tax, but feels like a nuclear strike on a country's export system. Now imagine if such a tariff were imposed on a country like India, whose annual trade with the United States exceeds $120 billion. What would happen then? Silence in factories, fear in IT companies, and from pharmaceuticals to textiles. One question would echo across every sector. What happens next? This fear, these questions, and this uncertainty are currently circulating through global trade corridors. The reason is a proposal from US President Donald Trump that has shaken the entire world. The idea of imposing a 500% tariff on countries that buy oil from Russia. On the surface, it sounds like a foreign policy move, but in reality, it is an attack on the nerves of the global economy. And India is standing right at the center of the story. A recent warning from the Global Trade Research Initiative has intensified this fear even further. The message of the report is straightforward. If this tariff is implemented, India's exports to the United States could almost completely stop. And this is no small matter. The United States is currently India's largest export destination. IT services, pharmaceuticals, engineering goods, auto components, textiles. America is the biggest customer for all of them. So the question is, why is this threat so serious? And why is this sword hanging over India's head? After the Russia-Ukraine war, the global oil market has completely changed. Western countries impose sanctions on Russia, but oil is a commodity that cannot be replaced overnight. Both India and China continued buying oil from Russia because energy security is their biggest concern. Cheap Russian oil helps India control inflation, manage its current account, and fuel economic growth. But from Washington's perspective, the story looks different. The US wants to economically isolate Russia, and for that, it is ready to use tools like secondary sanctions and tariffs. The paradox here is that China and India are among the biggest buyers of Russian oil. But who is under greater pressure? The answer is India. The GTRI report highlights this very hypocrisy. The US has already signaled its stance by imposing an additional 25% tariff on India, while China has largely been left untouched. Why? Because the US fears that if China is cornered, it could block the supply of rare earth minerals, materials that form the backbone of America's high-tech sector, EVs and defense industry. In other words, China has leverage. India does not. And this is where the risk for India increases exponentially. If an extreme tariff like 500% is imposed, its burden could fall disproportionately on India. Now let's understand what a 500% tariff actually means in real life. Suppose an Indian company exports a product worth $100 to the US. If a 500% tariff is imposed, the American importer would have to pay $600 for the same product. The question is, would any buyer purchase something so expensive when the same product is available cheaper from another country? The answer is clear, no. Technically, exports may not be banned, but practically, the market would be shut. That is why GTRI says the US market would effectively be closed to India. The impact would not be limited to just one or two industries. IT services, the backbone of India's export story, would be among the first to be hit. The pharmaceutical sector, which supplies generics to the US, is highly price sensitive, with already thin margins. In textiles and apparel, competition from Vietnam, Bangladesh and Mexico is intense. Auto components and engineering goods are already bearing high compliance costs. A 500% tariff would deliver a knockout punch to all of them. But the most dangerous angle is services. Imposing tariffs on goods is technically possible through the customs system. Ships arrive, taxes are levied at ports, and goods are cleared. But services? Services do not arrive in containers. IT services, consulting, design, accounting, all operate through cross-border payments. According to the GTRI report, imposing tariffs on services would itself become a legal minefield for the US still. If America moves in this direction, it is possible that it could impose extra taxes or withholding on payments made to Indian IT firms. That would mean when US companies pay Indian IT firms, an additional charge would apply. The result: Indian services would suddenly become far more expensive. And look at the irony. America's own economy is heavily dependent on Indian IT and business services. Banks, hospitals, tech giants. All of them rely on India for back-end operations. In such a situation, imposing tariffs on services could turn out to be a self-goal for the US as well. But in the Trump era, rationality has not always been a consistent part of policy. Now the question is, will this 500% tariff actually be implemented? GTRI's analysis says that getting the proposed bill passed through the US Senate will not be easy. The bill has been introduced by Senator Lindsey Graham, but it still needs formal Senate approval. And in the US political system, extreme trade measures are not passed easily, especially when they could trigger domestic backlash. At present, the Trump administration is largely using presidential emergency powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. However, these powers are already being challenged in US courts, and a Supreme Court verdict is still pending. If the courts impose limits, Trump's hands could be tied. This means that in the short term, the threat looks more like policy rhetoric than enforceable law. But in trade, perception can be just as powerful as reality. Even a threat alone can make companies pause investments, delay orders, and shift supply chains. Now the real question. What should India do? On this point, the GTRI report is very blunt. India will have to abandon strategic ambiguity. On the issue of buying oil from Russia, New Delhi must take a clear, decisive, and confident stand in front of Washington. Half statements, silence, or delays can signal to the US that India may bend under pressure. And in geopolitics, signaling weakness is the most dangerous thing. India has strong arguments. India can say that energy security is not a luxury, but a necessity. India can also say that it has not violated international law. India can further point out that if there is a rules-based global trade system, then the rules must apply equally to everyone, whether it is India, China, or any other country. GTRI has raised a very sharp question about US policy. On one hand, the US says countries buying Russian oil will be punished. On the other hand, it takes an aggressive stance on oil reserves in countries like Venezuela. In other words, the rules seem to be changing based on convenience. The report calls this not a rules-based order, but something even worse. Jungle law, where the powerful do whatever suits them, and compliance is expected only from the weak. If a policy like a 500% tariff is introduced, it will no longer remain just a trade issue. It would be a direct attack on the backbone of the India-US strategic partnership. Defense cooperation, technology partnerships, initiatives like the Quad. All of these would be affected. Once trust is broken, it takes years to repair. India-US relations are not limited to a buyer-seller dynamic. They are linked to the Indo-Pacific balance, countering China, and global supply chain diversification. In such a scenario, a trade war-like move would become a lose-lose situation for both countries. But Trump's politics often operate like a zero-sum game. Showing the domestic audience that I am tough and I am punishing those who support Russia is a narrative that works in electoral politics. Now the question is, will India simply endure this storm or will it proactively shape the outcome? India has options. WTO challenges, bilateral negotiations, alternate markets, and a pivot toward Europe and the global south. But in the short term, pain would be inevitable if the situation worsens. That is why the coming weeks and months are extremely critical. This is not just a tariff story. It is a story of power, pressure, and principle. It is a test of which direction global trade will take. Rules or muscle. And perhaps the biggest question is this. Will 21st century global trade be driven by tweets and threats, or by treaties and trust? Because if weapons like a 500% tariff become normalized, no country will be safe tomorrow. Today it is India. Tomorrow it could be someone else. And then global trade will no longer be a game of numbers. It will become a game of fear.
If our video has taught you something new, do not forget to like and share this video so that this information can reach others as well. Your likes and shares are a source of inspiration for us. If you have any questions or suggestions, please let us know in the comments. It will be our honor to answer your questions and listen to suggestions. And yes, if you like our content, subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so that you stay connected with every new story. Thank you. GRT Business YouTube channel sources, news from various news agencies, opinion polls and other public sources. We try to ensure that every report and summary is accurate and verified, but we are not responsible for any dispute or error. Our aim is only to provide you with accurate information.